it's my mother's family, the Reamer family, that were members there too. So, and that goes back to like 1900 that they wrote all that stuff down. So it's pretty interesting. And
Yeah,
I've got extra copies, and I'll bring them down next time we come down.
great, great. I hear there's going to be a great special music number this week.
Yeah, I wonder who that's going to be.
Traveling
Of
guitar.
all things, it'll be an old English folk hymn from the 1700s.
What's the name?
Oh,
It's called Jacob's Vision.
ah.
Wow.
Well, let's be ecumenical and international. English folk hymn sounds great. So I know that. So I hear the name Reamers a lot as I think about the network of families at Eden. I mean, people talk about Gubby Reamer. I know Mary Abbott, our 101-year-old member who lives in Colorado, is like step family with Reamers. Are any of those Reamers your people, Sharon?
No, two different Reamer families.
Uh-huh.
Two totally not related at all.
So
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah. But I guess it must have been a good German name that, everybody settled there, and, wow.
It'd be curious to see. I mean, her mom's side of the family came from Hearst in Russia.
Okay.
They immigrated. I think that's in one of the documents. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
on mother's or her father's side. Be interesting to see what area or what towns some of the other older families in the church, if their parents recorded that or grandparents recorded it, where they're from. Are they all like clustered together, like in the size of Jefferson Park? Or were they spread out like over the size of, half of Illinois in that German Russian community?
Right. Carol, do you know anything about that?
Somewhere. Yeah, since I still belong to Ancestry, I could go in and check. Otherwise, what part of this thing? I know I have something like I said. I did my mom's side of it, but I just did to it. And see, but I would assume they all will change from around the same community, because when they came together, if there's a park, and they all lose. Getting back to wars, there was a war on what's related to the war on North.
I'm pulling up a thing I want to share on the screen. I think I mentioned in the notes, so this is the coolest thing. I'm going to share the screen with you guys. I joined the Volga German Facebook group online years ago, and kind of a few times episodically have like spent a little bit more time in it than others, but I haven't in a long time. So I'm scrolling down like posts from this week, and someone put a thing, someone's reading this month this book, and and mentioned a couple different things from it. So I thought that was interesting. And by the way, I just ordered I might have ordered that last copy from Amazon, Sharon. I ordered it today. So I wanted to show you this. I pulled it up, and he had written this, and then in another post, this Betty Gore Wilmot, who visited last year, in the fall, she posted some things in this national group, and was like trying to network, right? And she said, my grandparents were from Schwede, Russia. And I think that is the village that I've heard Keith Weigel talk most about. So I think a chunk of them came from that. Does that sound familiar to anyone else?
Mm-mm.
You know it was a what? Yeah. Yeah, so
What was the comment?
Carol said she knew it started with an S. Yeah. And then this is fun. So I wanted to show you guys this Facebook post. I was just looking at this stuff this afternoon. So a couple of things. People start responding to Betty's post, and a woman named Katie Davis responded, well, I was familiar with her name because I remembered someone had put in an order for a cookbook that I hadn't seen, that I hadn't recognized the name. And it was her. And so then she goes into these other names: Neubauers, Grossmans, Gables, Goebbels, Neubauers, and Goebbels went to Eden Church and lived across the street. And then I learned in the back and forth there, Betty jumps on it and says, my grandparents went to Eden. They were founding members. And then she showed a picture of, they showed a picture that she took last May at the anniversary service. And then Katie goes in a bit more about her husband. No, Charlene says about her husband. Katie interacts. They have some people in common, maybe. They wonder, they don't.
Went to Beaubien.
What's that?
And this girl went to Beaubien school.
Yeah.
Up one more, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then
Yeah.
Gloria, so here's somebody, Weber's, who are connected down at Redeemer, right?
Mm.
And
Hmm.
they go back and forth. Another mention of Schwade. And then there was something I wanted to show you what this. So Betty wanted to know, did they go to Eden? My father's did, but my mother's side went to Calvary. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
And then they ask about Pfeiffer's who went to Calvary. Somewhere down here. So it goes on, and they're like reminiscing about both of the churches. And then here's someone who jumps in, who grew up in Forest Glen. Laurel, that's a neighborhood just a little northeast of this.
Yeah.
And so here's a stranger I've never heard of.
With Brian Goebel. Wait a minute. I grew up in Forest Glen, just north of Jefferson Park, and went to Beaubien Elementary. Brian Goebel, and so did Jim. Do you remember Casper? Casper
Yeah.
Stamich?
I don't know. First name sounds familiar, but
German American, though not vulgar. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
so I don't know. I'm gonna follow up and see who this person is. But so you remember Brian, Sharon?
Well, he graduated with Jim. I went to school with Brian's sister Anna.
Huh.
So yeah, but Brian and Jim were classmates.
At Beaubien and at Schurz High School.
Yeah.
Well, and then Casper asks, do you remember the German language service at Eden Church?
Yep.
Yes. It ended on my watch as president.
I'm gonna turn. Let's go back to that in a second. There's a Tamra Fredericks. Yeah. So that to me, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Right?
Yeah.
Like I happened to go in the group, and then there was this network of stuff. But it is interesting that where I see people, remembering so fondly the German services. And Jim, I'd love for you to share anything you remember about that, like growing up, and then what it was like as president to have to deal with that situation.
When I was growing up, the German service, I believe, was at 8 o'clock in the morning. And then the English service was at 10 or 10:30.
10:45.
Or 10:40, 10:45. And my dad would like to attend the German service once in a while. It kept his German more fluent.
And my grandparents, Adam and Emily Cook, would always go to the German service at 8 o'clock.
And And the German service was pretty strong, probably with enough people to sustain it till the 70s. And then at the end, there was only 2 or 3 people, and doing that capitalistic thing called dollar cost averaging. It's hard to bring in a German speaking pastor, which was harder and harder.
So they were, so, yeah, so like during all those years, like the 50s, 60s, 70s, was it just true that the called pastor spoke German too, or did they have to have multiple people?
The called pastor had to speak German through Pastor Melhoff's time, which you'd have to look up exactly what those years were. Those were in the 60s.
Did Melhoff speak
Yeah,
German?
he spoke
Did
German.
he do the German service?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I don't remember that.
And after that, they would have to bring in I don't know what you call it, pulpit supply to do the Germans. And the last one, God, I forget his name now. He was from a Baptist church over on Elston Avenue by where Elston and Foster cross together in Fort Glen. I don't know if that's still a Baptist church, but he was there. And when we ended that service, there were 2 members attending German service.
Yeah.
And they both spoke English fluently. And it was just time, and there was some hemming and hawing at the congregational meeting, mainly for historical reasons, but it's one of those things, you just can't do it for 2 people who can speak English perfectly well.
Well, I don't know if you can't do it, but you have to ask yourself, why are you doing it and with whose resources?
Yeah, that's true, because if it's hard, some people, I mean, we're all comfortable. We don't want to change. And if you're going to German service, you don't want to change.
Yeah.
That
There's there's the pain we feel at that moment, which is the end of an era.
Mm-hmm.
And it has so much more symbolic freight to it than just the plain facts, right? Carol, was a German services, was that important to your family? Hold on a second, I gotta turn you up. Okay, go ahead.
My uncle Sean, let's say for sure, because going forward, his name was not, and yeah, they were one of the last.
Yeah. Sorry about the weird echoing as we're trying to make this work. I did notice when I was reading when I was listening to our recording from last week earlier today, I noticed that because Zoom has the transcript running, everything Carol says is caught in the transcript.
Oh.
So even though it might be difficult to catch some of it while we're online, the fact that you're here and you're talking means that it's captured in the recording, and that's really helpful. Yeah. We're gonna figure it out. Jackie occasionally accidentally fixes things. I'll take a look at it on Friday. In fact, no, what I'd like to say in addition is that anytime Jackie fixes anything, it's an accident.
But the church I grew up in did Dutch services that stopped abruptly during World War II. But when my grandparents moved to the nursing home, my grandfather had a very large book of Dutch sermons. And it was a pretty predominantly Dutch nursing home they were in. So he, with the help of some administrators at the nursing home, started doing a Dutch service where he would read a Dutch sermon. And it was better populated than the English service they had. But what he would tell me very frequently is, it's easier for me to communicate with my Jesus in the language of my heart.
Oh, well, that's precious.
Because he was very fluent in English, but he always prayed in Dutch.
That's precious. Wow.
And
That's a
I think that that was why it was so hard for them when the Dutch services stopped.
Mhm. It's a beautiful way to phrase that. Thanks for passing that on. His words, the language of your heart. And it's, you know, I find it impossible to diminish the reverence of that. And you would, and I'll just, you know, say that, that feels like it would be true of any human cultural group.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Yeah.
people who are uncaring about that are uncaring about that.
I mean, just think of how traumatic it was for a lot of older Catholics when they quit doing the mass in Latin. Even though they didn't understand Latin,
Mhm.
it's what they knew. It was their
Comforting.
comfort, it was their home. It was
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so, you know, I have a couple of stray thoughts about this turn. One, you know, I think I don't know any congregations in my sphere in Chicago, which is pretty wide because I've been here 35 years, that have non-English services who are European immigrant communities.
Wow.
Maybe there may be some recent Ukrainians. I mean, maybe there's some,
Mm.
and there's Polish. There are still some Polish services, I should say, but I can't think of any others. And that's kind of an interesting just turn of culture and history. The other thing, since you started mentioning some pastors, Jim, is I would say I have an interest in figuring out what it would look like to commission some research on past pastors, like where are they now if they're still living. Most of them are not. um you know, but you know, but also kind of like the like to trace the story of where did they go after Eden, like what did they do after Eden. And you can, you know, you can kind of hold the question, what did their time, how did their time at Eden affect them, shape them um for, you know, good or ill. I know some of those, departures were rough. And Jim, you know, Carol, were you at Trinity when the Melhoff thing happened? Am I getting the right name, Jim?
yes. Pastor Melhoff left. He was only here about 4 years, and from here he went to a church in Fremont, Nebraska, because my dad and I went and visited him out in Fremont, Nebraska.
That was the heart of Volga Germans.
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah,
it?
that was definitely in German territory
Yeah.
up there. So that was about 45 minutes north of Omaha, Nebraska. So it's right on the Iowa border. And Pastor Ulrich, once he got his doctorals, went up to Lakeland College and started teaching. He had a professorship up at Lakeland College near Sheboygan. And Pastor Greenholt retired to the UCC retirement community in Bensonville, I believe, Illinois. Or was it by Ulick? It's one of those two places. So he retired out of the pastorate. And I don't know where Pastor Felice would have been, the other one. And I don't
Yeah,
know where
I
he
think
went
They
after
got
that.
divorced.
I believe that that last one, how do you pronounce his name?
Ken,
Ken Felice.
I
Felice.
believe he's passed now. I don't know where he went right after this. I have to show you this. So this is Lakeland previously Lakeland College, Lakeland University that Jim just mentioned,
Oh.
up near Sheboygan. And, I feel like this is a really interesting, significant impact on the wider church of someone who had, was shaped in some way during his time at Eden. This Pastor Ulrich, there's a whole like center at this university named after him, the Ulrich Center
Wow.
for
Wow.
Faith, Ethics, and Justice. And I think Dwayne Ulrich mentioned this to me at some point some years ago, Reverend Dr. Reinhard Ulrich. But then it like really dawned on me the significance of his academic career after he left Eden, and like the impact on the wider church's growth and training religion students there in the college afterwards. And last summer, was it last summer? Yeah, June of 2024, I went to an installation of an American Baptist denominational figure up in Wisconsin at Green Lake. And through a small world thing, I met a young college kid who is the last Ulrich scholarship recipient
Oh,
Wow.
at
wow.
Lakeland University. Isn't that like the coolest small world thing?
Yeah,
Yeah. So, so one of the things that this made me wonder is, what did Ulrich, like, he had an academic career, like, what did he write about? What were his positions on things that we all care and wonder about? It'll be interesting to follow that line. That's the thing I'm particularly interested in.
The little bit I remember, because him and my dad became good friends because he was a model train collector, Pastor Ulrich, and so was my dad. And Pastor Ulrich was what they call High German. He was a Berliner. So
And High German means he wasn't a Volga German?
he was not a Volga German. I don't even know if we've ever had a Volga German pastor in my lifetime.
Huh.
Because I don't know if that was a thing back then. So when he came to this country, he remembers the Allies bombing Germany in World War II. So he grew up under that. He spoke with a very, like that educated German accent you would hear in TV movies. That high, because he was educated when he came here. I'm pretty sure he finished his doctorate at the UCC seminary down in Hyde Park.
That's my school, Chicago Theological
Yeah,
Seminary.
I'm pretty sure he finished that, and he was here 10 years at Eden Church, which until Pastor Greenhold came was the longest term of any pastor. Usually we scared him out before then.
Well, and some died.
Yeah,
Oh,
some
yeah.
died.
Well,
Ollie
usually-
Holtz, I remember that.
We usually say that we either kick them out or kill them.
Kill him off, yeah.
Be careful, Jackie.
Yeah, and I think of all the pastors that I remember, Pastor Ulrich wasn't afraid of anybody or the threats that anyone would have said. How dare you speak that in church? Or how dare, because they used to do that. If it's not in Das Bibel, you can't speak about it. But by God, if he wanted to speak about Martin Luther, he would.
mhm.
He didn't follow that misguided old version of only speak about the folks named in the Bible. Well,
What did he tell the elders when he came for their
yeah,
trial sermon?
yeah. This is partly mythology, maybe, and partly just humorous story. So I can neither confirm nor deny. So I get this from my dad that when they set up the thing for Pastor Ulrich to give his trial sermon, he did one in English and one in German, right? So at the German service at that time, the women sat on the epistle side of the church and the men sat on the gospel side. And he came in and he sat down with his wife. Well, you can imagine those German ushers just being besides themselves. And I remember him as a kid being real tall and big and massive, like a football player. And apparently he said to him, if she's good enough to sleep with, she's good enough to sit with. And they did vote him in office. I think they were terrified of him. Yeah, yeah. Because he was probably the only one that ever stood up to him.
Yeah,
That is really
And their
interesting.
anger. Now, again, I can either
confirm it.
or deny that that's a reality. But
Yeah,
it's a hell of a good story either way.
that is a really good
doing
story.
it though.
Yeah, he could
Yeah.
be pretty
Persuasive.
loud if he had to, because he was the guy who would go up to the pulpit and somebody would ask him, you know, why do you take off your wristwatch to keep your sermon? And he said, no, it just bothers me.
Me, it makes no difference. There's no meaning.
And I could see him in the old tradition of the church where the pulpits were gated in Europe, and they would
Mhm.
hand you the Bible as you went up with the scriptures,
Yeah,
you know, marked off. That he would have been perfectly at home, looking down 15 feet on the peasants below him as he, you know, gave his sermons and stuff like that.
oh. Well, it is certainly one interesting aspect of a church's story and identity is the various characters of people who have served as pastor, what the relationships were like as during that season of ministry. You know, they faced external challenges of economics or war or social change, and how the internal climate was, if there was lasting conflict or division about things. And so, you know, every church has its journey of being shaped by the experiences they had as leadership changes, right? I know the ENR tradition in general might have historically put the pastor at more of a center of church life than other denominations, but you know, it's never true that the pastor is the center of the church's life. Although obviously the wisdoms or failings of any pastor can greatly affect the future of the church in terms of the experiences that they had. So I was going to ask you guys about Melhoff. Carol, were you at Eden when the controversies around Melhoff's preaching and his addressing of the civil rights era? Am I getting the right guy? I always get Melhoff and Hoffman mixed up. All right.
No, that you've got him.
Honestly, I came in, I changed that.
Yeah, and you.
Now, Belfast, no,
Yeah. And you were at Trinity for 25 or 30 years? Yeah. So who was the pastor when you left?
I don't know.
Yeah.
It was just, I was never at the time when I was a month before my 8th birthday.
Oh, right.
So don't remember who the pastor was.
Yeah.
I know that my brother was there.
And so, Laurel, the church that Carol's family became a part of for those decades is called Trinity Lutheran. It's a Slovak congregation historically, and it's not far from Eden at all, less than 10 minutes. We have a warm relationship with the church leaders there. We don't do as much collaboratively right now as we have at some times. But my sense is that didn't Bob Decker also have history at Trinity?
Oh,
Boy, that I don't,
yeah, I don't know.
might have.
I think I think they worshipped at Trinity for some time, but Bob is now passed on, Laurel and his wife Sue. They've both died in the last decade. But Sue grew up at Eden, I think. Sue Decker.
Yeah, she was,
Yeah, because her brother was your godfather.
yeah,
Oh, who's that?
John Schneider was his name. And there's 3 Schneider families and that was, it was a small tight knit community, you know? It's, everyone knew everybody.
What'd you say, Carol?
But mostly a lot of them were related.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh. Well, yeah, so not to beat the dead horse about the pastor thing, but that is kind of like one area of interest I have in the future. And that might just be my own personal curiosity. Thinking about the footsteps of those who've gone before me. I did in the document, I'll show you it, that notes document I started making. I started putting some links in there. So on page 1 and 2, I just kind of looked at my raw notes after listening to the video and started trying to summarize our conversation last time. And if there's anything there that should be corrected or expanded, please do that. And then I started naming the family names that we had named last week that I could remember. What was your, Sharon, what was your grandma's maiden name on your dad's side?
On my dad's side, Grandma Craig, she was a Simon.
And
Simon.
that was one of the Volga German names too?
I don't know.
Well, she was Volga German, though, I think.
She was?
I think so.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Was that Carol?
What are the names of your Kramer, Schran?
Could you say that again?
Craig,
My mother,
Simon,
my grandmother's name was K-E-N-T.
K-E, yeah.
I think it's big one of this thing, but it's my fault.
And then my,
Plus the French and Dutch there.
and what does that say? Historic families. And then my mom's family, that was Cook, K-O-C-H.
Yeah. So, one of the things that, well, I was going to share these. So I just wanted to call attention that I started putting some links in here, like to some various websites. And then here's a shortcut to those 2 YouTube sessions that Keith Weigel did last May. And Jim joined us for both of those, a couple other people. But it's really nice to have the recording, and I know a good batch of people who've listened to it since. But then some other things from the internet, Wikipedia and the Historical Society website, and the link to that Facebook group. And so I did spend a little bit of time on the Eden Seminary webpage, the ENR Seminary in Missouri, and just enough to discover that they have a whole archives thing there about the life of the seminary and its impact, etc. So sometime I or other curious people might call them, have the librarian say, hey, do you have, if you have anything in your archives about Eden Church? That would be interesting. Or actually what's probably more likely is we could give them a list of the first 5 or 6 pastors of the church, and say, what do you know about these people who were your alumni, right? So that'd be interesting if there are folks interested in that. Yeah.
And when was the actual founding year of Eden Church again?
1914.
14, okay. They even had, and I remember him because I was on council at the time, an interim pastor who had the best German name I ever heard, Helmut Dimmel.
Dimmel?
Dimmel,
Yep.
Diemel, I think, or
Yeah.
ML.
Yeah, Helmut, very nice guy. And he was in the room because he also spoke German.
Yeah.
And he spoke with a little bit of a German accent. And
He was a short, tiny.
short little guy, yeah.
Yeah. Kind of built like Collier,
Yeah, but
Pastor
thin,
Collier.
but skinny.
skinny.
Yeah. I remember Helmut Dimmel for some reason. I don't know why, but I do. Maybe because of the name.
Would Carol, would you or the Schranzes maybe share a little bit about your experience with the Collier family and his ministry? And I haven't shared with Laurel the circumstances of his departure.
He was
Hold on a second. I'm inserting Carol up.
okay.
Okay, Jim first, then Carol.
He married Sharon and I, and we became very close with Pastor Collier and his wife Charlotte, and he was, I would say, the most book smart pastor I've ever
Yeah.
met. He was very scholarly, soft spoken, like those old commercials for that investment firm.
E.F. Hutton.
E.F. Hutton, you know, he was very soft spoken like that. He looked a lot like C.S. Lewis. If you see pictures of C.S. Lewis,
Mhm.
he was gentle beyond gentle. You could see his love of Jesus in his face, in his every action.
Hmm.
And he brought me more to life in church than any pastor before that, because I taught a Bible study when he was here as pastor. He let me, and all gentle, you know, and some of that is guilt. You know, he knew how to guilt you in a gentle and loving and kind way to do stuff. And he was just a person that to me embraced me for what I was. I mean, I got along with pretty much everyone with the pastors that I met and knew, but he was special. And I think it's because he was versed in a lot of things. And he and his wife traveled the world. So they were very open to the fact that other cultures have something to offer, even though they may not be Christian. They're to be embraced as God's creation. And that's, and then he died of a brain aneurysm, right?
Yeah,
When he was-
instantly.
instantly. Just
Instantly. It was on a Thursday night because we had choir rehearsal, and Charlotte was teaching or something down in Hyde Park where they had their other home, and it was at the end of choir rehearsal, and he was there, and he was all dressed up in a three-piece suit to go down and pick up Charlotte, and he was shaking our hands, saying goodbye to us as we left choir rehearsal. And my girlfriend Georgia was there, and I left before her, or no, she and I left together. And it was like 5 minutes later, it all turned out like 5 minutes later that he dropped dead of an aneurysm, just like that, on the church property there. And Jim was president at the time. Gene Schnarr was the vice president, or was it vice versa?
vice
Versa. Gene was the president, Jim was vice president. And Gene made the initial calls and everything that he had to do as president. And then he put his phone on a voicemail, and nobody called him anymore. And they all called Jim, who was working, and no cell phones at the time. So they all came to me during the day. And if there was one, there was 500 of them. And I was I worked from home babysitting and answering these phone calls. And Gene just thought that was the funniest thing afterwards. Because I didn't get any phone calls. I pushed them all onto you guys. But it was just such a shock because he was just there. He was just there and shaking hands and saying goodbye and have a nice weekend and see you on Sunday. And he was gone.
Still
Shit.
sad,
Yeah.
still sad.
Yeah.
Is Charlotte still living?
She passed sometime in the last 6 or 8 years, I think. I remember Steve
Oh.
brought the obituary into church when he learned of it, and
Who brought it in?
I think it was when Pastor Steve was still pastor, because I
Oh.
remember him copying the obituary and announcing it.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
I think.
Yeah, because I think I didn't keep in contact with her, but she was still down in the St. Louis area, I think.
Yeah. Carol, so he was the pastor when you came back?
His mother died. We were split at Trinity, and we were looking at other churches, because Sunday school had gone down at Trinity. And one of the churches looked at, okay, my mother had issues, but I mean, I told her what I was going to do. And he actually came over after the service, he came to our house and consoled with us.
Wow.
And I was so touched and everything about that. And that made it nice of good going to be.
Yeah,
And we didn't know him that long. I think he died within a few years after that.
yeah.
And, but yeah, I remember he was in choir practicing. I think it was outside Mayor's car at the time. And that's what I was told.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I thought it was great.
We have a plaque with his kind of a, I don't know what you would call it. It's not really a photograph. It's kind of an etching of his face, and it's like a memorial plaque in the parlor. I don't know if you've noticed that when you've been in, or maybe you were responsible for making it, Jim. I don't know.
Not me.
Like when you were president? Your
I
brother,
don't-
think?
I think it came later.
Yeah, like a in memoriam.
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, tonight's conversation has kind of followed some threads from the history experiences of the German immigrants, family stuff, pastor stuff. I shared some stuff about Facebook. In fact, I think this Katie Davis, I didn't say when I was sharing that Facebook page that as I was reading through that thread of posts that I was sharing, that somewhere in there I figured out that Katie Davis tagged me 29 minutes ago. So let's see what she's going to say. Katie's the one who was interacting with Betty in that group, and like I remembered that she ordered a cookbook last year. It turns out that she and Penny Dahmer are cousins.
Oh my goodness. Is Katie Davis, is that her married name or is that her maiden?
I don't know. I'm gonna ask her right now because she's on Facebook right now.
Okay.
I'm saying we're having our whatever you call this history conversation right now. So Penny's maiden name was Hanson. I have no idea.
Right.
Katie's.
Do you want some?
Yeah. So Katie says, yes, Penny's my cousin. In fact, I was raised kitty corner to the church at 5100, 5102 Gunnison. Also, it says she lives in Chicago. I must meet her.
So, but she still didn't answer if Davis was her maiden name.
Not yet.
Okay.
Huh. Well, Laurel, what do you think about this week 2 of this meandering migration that is enriched by stories and questions?
No, I am finding it so very, very interesting. I really am.
You know, as someone with significant family roots in, another church tradition, and who's had significant long periods of membership and devotion in other churches, right? Um, I feel like you I feel like you resonate with the values so much that are like implicit in this
Oh,
conversation
well,
today.
absolutely. I mean, just as an offshoot, the church that my parents grew up, I mean, it's the same one that moved, but when they attended the church as kids, it was at 14th and Ashland in the city, and then moved to Berwyn. And my grandparents still lived across the street from the 14th and Ashland, and the building was sold to an African American congregation.
Mhm.
And my grandfather, as a master carpenter, had built the pulpit
Mm.
in the
Oh,
old
wow.
church.
Mm.
He kept attending the old church with the African American congregation. He said, "My pulpit is in that building. I got to make sure they're talking about Jesus in there."
Wow.
And stayed there for quite a while, actually. So,
Is
and
that African American congregation a Presbyterian one?
I think it was AME.
Oh, okay.
Um, and the building actually was raised about 3 years ago because it was just totally falling apart. But
Yeah.
the pastor that had been there when my parents were kids became our pastor emeritus and moved back to the area. But his son would do bus tours from Berwyn to the old church at 14th and Ashland for anyone who was interested.
Mm.
So, talking about the theology of place, because that place was just sacred to the people. And I'm glad that most of them had passed on before the building was raised, because it would have killed them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Jackie, are you familiar with Christ Church in Des Plaines?
Yeah, actually.
Okay, because Jim's folks, or Jim and his stepmother, they lived like a block and a half from there, and they were members there. And back when they still obviously lived in the Des Plaines area, that church had a Volga German group that met there.
Huh.
And Jim's dad, Charles, was very, very interested and very involved, even though he wasn't a Volga German.
Huh.
And so maybe if they had any history of that group, and I don't know if that group was from the church.
I
or if
know
they just-
I know the pastor somewhat superficially. I will reach out to him and inquire.
Yeah. And again, like, I don't know if it was a part of the church or did they rent space to
Right.
meet there.
Right.
But that could be another source of information.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I want to be a good steward of people's time.
oh, wait a minute, Jim has one more question.
Oh, and Carol's waving.
Oh,
Okay, go ahead. Let
go ahead.
Carol
Yeah,
go
go ahead,
Carol first. Hold on.
Okay.
Well, we're related to the Dahmers too, and the Kramers.
Huh.
In my ancestry, I think there's a Jody Davis.
Oh,
Second or something, or whatever. I don't know. I wondered if that would be related to Paige Davis.
I'm gonna ask her.
I think it was Jody Davis, if I remember. I keep getting emails about what people cite to ancestry.
Yeah.
Relation.
Yeah.
I think it was Jody Davis. So that would be interesting because if she's related to Penny, then she may be related to me too.
That's really cool. I'm gonna reach out to her about that. Jim, what did you have?
Yeah, I noticed the name of one of the communities from Russia that some of the people came from was Schwabe. There is a group of Germans called the Danube Schwabians, and I wonder if that's somehow where that name Schwabe came from, who lived in southern Germany.
Yeah.
Still have a presence around here in soccer, at least, because there's a soccer and
Up
fraternal.
here by us.
Oh,
Lake Villa.
Yeah.
I bet Keith Weagle would know some more about that. Whether there's any, like what the etymological connections might be.
Yeah.
There was something a couple minutes ago that I just wanted to say out loud so that I don't forget, and maybe this is a starting point of some kind next time, on this theme of like place. I also know all around us in the sanctuary are objects of our beautiful sacred space, objects and aspects of it that these ancestors made, donated, or that were part of some memorial event. And I suspect a close look at archived minutes and stuff might surface over time some of those details where details are lost. But the banners typically, because of Gene Snar, have something on the back that say who made it, who donated it, if it was in memory of a thing. In fact, a year and a half or two ago, we started printing in every week's bulletin. The banners today were, for this season, were made by, dedicated by, and I kind of had this vision of trying to unearth some of that information. The Christ candle, there's the perpetual candle that's always lit. I came across accidentally a story of and I can't remember what the name was now, but somebody had donated on some special occasion. Of course, the windows, many of them were dedicated by or purchased by set families. So, I mean, that's another thread, I think, of like, what are the physical aspects of our house of God that are the loving legacy of people who've gone before. Yeah.
I think the pulpit. I mean, you don't see new churches don't have raised pulpits like that.
Mm-mm.
That to me was a special thing, that indicating the old Lutheran tradition of the word of God raised up. That was the idea of the sermon, was raising up the word of God. So the pulpit had to be raised.
Was Steve the first pastor who didn't use it regularly?
No, Pastor Greenholt didn't use it all the time. Occasionally he did, but later he didn't. And it became a little wonky to get up there. And you didn't want to see it falling down at anybody standing up there.
Yeah, I've preached from the pulpit. You know what, Laurel? This is reminding me that I said a few months ago that we'd do some kind of video that's like a virtual tour of the inside of the church. And we're sure the heck going to do that. We're going to do that. So in case you haven't seen the pulpit, it's high and lifted up. And I've preached from it on purpose maybe a half a dozen times earlier in my time there. Some Easter, Christmas times where I really felt led to. And last March, about a year ago, I had a sermon that on purpose started at the pulpit, came down to the floor, and then ended up in a chair. That was on politics and faith. But after COVID, I mostly didn't want to preach from up there because I felt that people were likely to be very sensitive about anyone articulating anything from on high and spraying out something besides the word of God.
I can see that.
Or somebody trying to separate themselves from people.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a low church Baptist, so it doesn't come easy to me to go up into the high space. It feels like it has to be the setting of a special occasion, or a special teaching purpose, but it's there and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. I mean, it's a testament to our legacy, to our heritage.
I remember when I was the president of the youth group, when I was in it, and there was a youth Sunday every year, how special it was that I got to give the sermon and go up into the pulpit. There was something spiritually significant about it.
Well, and when our visiting kids or newer member kids or the scouts are in the sanctuary on a tour of some kind, where do they want to go? Straight up, they want to go up there, right? Yeah.
See, when I gave the youth sermon, I was not allowed to use the pulpit.
Oh,
and different traditions that, I will give the
Mhm.
German Russians credit at that time. The youth service was important, so was laity Sunday.
Uh-huh.
And the lay, usually the council president spoke, and he was able to give his message from the pulpit, and those were very special, saying that again, in the tradition of Lutheran Church, is the priesthood. We're all priests and
Right.
believe.
Mhm.
So
Right. Well, maybe I can get President Ed Thomas to give a message in these next few months, especially as he plans to transition out of this role he's served so faithfully for 8 years.
Oh.
That would be very fitting.
if I can just interject something more on the lighter side of things that are in the sanctuary from different groups. But back in the early 80s, Jim and I and Bob Decker led the youth group. And Bob suggested for a youth project, because every time on the Sunday morning, people would sing, fold up your hymnal, drop it in the hymn rack, and it'd go clunk, 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 all around the church. It echoed. And apparently it drove him crazy. And he said, let's get carpeting, cut it down into strips, and put it on the bottom of the hymnal racks. That's the red carpeting that's in the bottom of those hymnal racks. We did that in the early 80s.
Wow.
Wow.
And there's no plaque or anything, but
No.
that was Bob Decker's, brainchild and stuff. And we sat there one Saturday and cut strips of the carpeting, and the kids put it in there. And yeah, it was,
That's beautiful.
yeah.
Thank
So
you
when,
for-
when we've been coming down there and stuff, I see that red carpeting and think of Bob. Yeah. So,
Blessed be. Blessed
Yeah.
be. I think of Bob. I think there's not a week that goes by that I don't think of him.
yeah, he was a
Yeah.
good guy. Good
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
He was the only one that he and Jim were the only two people that my father never argued with. Right?
that's pretty
Yeah.
much it.
Because he knew he couldn't win. And Bob was just a calming influence on my father. Just
Yeah.
calm. Yeah. So,
Blessed be. Well, thank you everyone for the great gift of conversation, reflection, question tonight. I hope you're game for a week 3, and then we'll see what the Holy Spirit intends after that.
okay, sounds great.
Sounds good.
Well, thank you for your time.
Yes.
Enjoy the evening. Blessed.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.